Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to join us for this panel today. It's a really hot topic as medical cannabis, or cannabis as a therapeutic herb, is really being rolled out. We have an amazing array here of doctors as well as very, very experienced herbalists. So I'll just quickly say this is Luke from Greenlight Health in Mullumbimby. We have Ray Thorpe from Happy Herb Company, very famous herb shop for many years now. We have the wonderful Dr. Teresa Towpik from Sydney, Professor Kylie O'Brien, who's come up all the way from Victoria, Dr. John Teh from PlantMed in Queensland, and Dr. Jamie Rickcord from Ananda Clinics in Byron Bay. So please put your hands together and welcome them. Over to you, Kylie.
Okay, so today's topic, we're going to talk about pharmaceuticalisation, I guess, of medicinal cannabis, and delve into, I guess, some of the differences in products on the market. Isolates, for example, versus whole plant medicines and anything in between. So what would be good, perhaps, is that if we have a roving microphone, we could have one of those as well. But anyway, a microphone, so that if you've got questions halfway through or any time, just put up your hand and Kathleen or one of the others can give the microphone, give us your questions, because sometimes we can sort of natter on amongst ourselves for ages, but that can be a little bit boring sometimes. You might have some questions that we hadn't even thought of. So please wave wildly and we'll do it that way, I think. So let's just perhaps start the ball rolling with the people I've got up here, which is an amazing array of people, and say, well, look, you know, some of you guys have been in the business for a long time, and I reckon you're probably not dealing in isolates, you're probably dealing in whole plant medicines. Tell us why.
Okay, I'll start. I'll start because I was just busted at the unfair driving swab test, which is supposed to be a random breath test. And I challenged the officer at the time. I said, this is not quantitative. And she said, what does that mean? And what are you talking about? I said, this is also not a random breath test. You're now giving me a drug test. And I resent that, and blah, 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 blah. And I thought I was pretty free because I don't smoke cannabis anymore. And I had a cup of coca tea, didn't I, this morning? And I'm now busted for a drug, a pharmaceutical version of a natural plant. So you can see where I'm coming from. It actually represents what I was going to talk about. And now I've lost my licence and I have to go to court and face a charge of drug use, cocaine, which I've only tried once in Peru, and I'm not a drug taker at all. So that's my beef, and I've got it out of the way with compassionate people. They weren't interested at all. They didn't even know what coca tea was. It's one of the most nutritious plants, and I think from my point of view, this is my contribution here. Coca plant itself is the most nutritious plant you can get, up there with cannabis, I guess, but certainly nutritious in minerals and every other vitamin, every other sense. But when it's pharmaceuticalized into cocaine, it becomes addictive and harmful. And I've been busted for the pharmaceutical, even though I had an innocent cup of tea. Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. Look, to be honest with you, I am open to whatever works best for the patient. Wherever the patient benefit is, that's where my interest is. So I didn't want to, let my own philosophy of whole plant or nature knows best get in the way of discovering things that may be better. So we've been working with this plant for about 7 years, and in that time we've tried everything from whole plant, isolates, and then combinations of both, and we've had varying successes with all of those things. A recent interest has been taking an isolate and creating a broad spectrum product out of it, so you can take things that are present in really small amounts in nature and make them express under the conditions of heat, pressure and pH. So getting other isomers of THC like delta-8 THC, which is much more sedative than delta-9 THC and doesn't have the side effects of making some people anxious or paranoid. And So I'm very interested in what we can discover through working with the plant. You know, a nature plus could be better than just nature or just human intervention. So I'm fascinated and happy to be up here with you guys on a journey of discovery, really. What I can say, though, is that with a lot of patients, the use of isolates seems to be a more expensive way to approach by the volume that you need, even though it's a cheaper product to use. So I can get a kilo of isolate from the States for a couple of grand, and if it worked better, if it genuinely worked better, well, that's where I would go, because the patient interest in making affordable medicines would be there. Unfortunately, what I see with the isolates by themselves is that you get a really limited window of efficacy, and then you're just throwing more at it. I think it's called a bell curve effect. And that's what I've seen in my chats with the Langford initiative. They were talking about 5 to 20 times more by milligram of use to get the same outcomes as we were getting with a whole plant or entourage effect. So recently we've started putting terpenes onto isolate to see how that behaves, and you get a better band of efficacy there. And we've also got whole plant and then added isolate to it. So, you know, you might get a 20-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC, and some patients still find that a little too sedative while they're looking for an anxiolytic effect. So if you double the amount of milligrams of CBD using an isolate, you can keep a person more present, still give them an anxiolytic effect, and do it for a more affordable rate than you otherwise would. So, as I said, I think there's just so much here that we aren't across. But I would like to see a study go into all of these things. And, you know, we can talk historically that we know pretty much what the whole plant does within reason in terms of the effects on people, how they feel, etc. But we're not sure what these isolates do. And so I think there needs to be a lot of study into the safety, efficacy of the safety and efficacy, but particularly the safety around the isolate use. And so I'm interested in seeing that done in really controlled conditions. So we've tried to replicate that amongst the many people that we work with. We have a small group of people that are responsible for ourselves and how we approach our own health. And I would love to see much more study, more time, and brilliant people putting in their own experience into this field.
Okay, let's hear from some of the doctors. So, Teresa, what experience have you got with?
Well, I'd like to say maybe a little bit general comment and some of my insights about whole plant medicine versus single molecule synthetic pharmaceutical agents. Let's just remember that humanity has been dealing with plant and herbal medicine for thousands of years. And the synthetic molecules, whether that pharmaceutical approach only started occurring from the beginning of the 20th century. And quite often pharmaceutical companies go to Amazonian jungle, whatever, they find the plant, they do this isolate, and it's supposed to work. However, that approach led to quite a significant polypharmacy, so we need one drug for this, one drug for another, and that results in quite a huge polypharmacy. So patients are taking lots of different drugs. Each drug comes with a long list of adverse effects, including death when overdose. So I wouldn't like, when it comes to herbal medicine and like cannabis, that we kind of do the same approach. For example, synthetic THC, dronabinol, has quite a significant adverse effects. And I think that also it comes from my personal experience, my spirituality, my belief system that plants co-evolve with us. We are surrounded by plants. We live with plants, and we interact with plants all the time. And that's why I think that entourage effect, that synergistic effect is very, very important. For example, THC would like open the door wide open and just hit you. But when it's combined with other components of the plant, the approach is much gentle. I mean, THC is just a weak partial agonist of CB1, CB2 receptors. So I am personally a strong believer of whole plant medicine, and I wouldn't like to see too much going into isolates. However, it might be appropriate for some people, but personally I'm a strong believer in whole plant extracts.
John.
Thanks for everyone for turning up today and having a listen. I suppose straight off the bat, I'm a believer in whole plant extracts as well, so I think we've got a fairly one-sided opinion on this panel, but it's probably the right opinion. I do use isolates in my practice where appropriate, and some people have very strong views on driving and just definitely not going to break the law. So there is a place for isolates. There's a place for isolates in the sense of some mental health disease where we're going to be really careful with THC, and we may add in a little THC later, but if someone's got florid schizophrenia, for instance, I wouldn't give them any THC straight up. I'd definitely work with probably an isolate initially. Talking about the bell curve effect that Luke was mentioning before, in my practice, I see whole plant medicines seem to be more effective as a generalisation. You seem to get a better result from a lower dose. And then when I was sort of brushing up for this conversation, I was looking through the literature, trying to find something that backed up my opinion. And I actually found it very, very difficult to find anything. And I'm not sure if everyone else here has had the similar thing happen. The only real studies I found were based on animals, not humans yet, which is obviously not as good as humans. But the one that referred to the bell curve, which Luke was talking about, was where they actually got little mice and dosed them up either intraperitoneally, injecting into their bellies, or orally with isolates, or a whole plant extract. And I won't say the name, but it had some amount of CBD and THC in it. It was a whole plant extract. And yeah, it did show that for the equivalent dosing, anxiety was reduced 5 milligrams for the whole plant extract to about 25 or 28 milligrams required of CBD to get the same anxiolytic effect. So that was very interesting. And it didn't have the shape of the bell curve, means that as we added more isolated CBD, it started to tail off the effectiveness, whereas the response was more linear from the whole plant medicine. So as we increased the dose, we got more result past the end of the bell curve. So that kind of says, yes, these are more effective. So I'm open to both, but I'm a bit of a believer in whole plant medicines.
There's actually, just following on from that study, there was one that was done in, I think, pain as well. And they, again, mice studies, so it was to do with pain and inflammation. So the bell-shaped curve basically means at a low dose it's not effective, in a moderate dose it is, and then at a high dose it's not. And that was what they found with the pure isolate. But then when they gave a whole plant medicine with the equivalent amount of I think it was CBD, the curve went up in a straight line. So it means a high dose, you got a better response. And that's what you'd sort of expect. So that showed me very clearly, straight up, the difference between an isolate, which has a narrow therapeutic window where it's effective. If it's too low, it's not. Too high, it's not either. With the whole plant medicine, it went upwards.
That was the same study. So they injected the little mouse's paw with something that made it sore.
That's right.
And they measured the swelling on that paw and the pain response. And that was the same study.
Yeah.
I haven't really got much else to add. I mean, I'm like John, I only prescribe full plant, really, unless people are worried about driving. I don't have that much success with isolates, to be honest. There's a couple that I think are great, but that tends to be in combination with THC as opposed to being on their own. I think the most important thing, though, just to go on from what Teresa was saying, was that until humans can design these, we shouldn't think we're smarter than nature. And you think about SSRIs, they were discovered by serendipity in the 1950s, and there's been a few sort of modifications of groups. Otherwise, there's been no progress in psychiatric medication for 50 or 60 years. And this idea that we know more than nature is just, it's farcical. So I think as this moves forward, we can, these medicines can be changed, but the basis is from nature, cannabinoids, endocannabinoid system. I think mental health, serotonin's a tryptamine, and then there's naturally occurring tryptamines that have all been banned as well, and they're extremely effective for treating mental health conditions. So it's the same thing. The answers are in nature, and I think modern medicine, and you have to be careful when we say pharmaceutical, because pharmacology is wonderful. The science of pharmacology is amazing. Pharmaceuticalization brings in all this negative stuff, but there are aspects to this that science and pharmacology can be used very effectively with synthetic type molecules that are going to get people better. but that's evolving out of basic, naturally occurring compounds, rather than thinking humans know more and inventing things, you know?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the animal research in cannabis has definitely been done on isolates, so they look at CBD isolates or THC isolates. Not a lot has been done across the board, at least in the research that I've been doing over the last 3.5 years. And I guess that's part of the Western thinking, Western medical thinking, biomedical thinking, is to try and reduce things to constituent parts rather than looking at things holistically. So my background's Chinese medicine, so obviously I'm schooled in that more holistic way of thinking about the body and herbs. And Teresa just did a great talk for those who were here, talking about her journey and understanding the holism of us as humans, not just, you know, body parts. Yeah, robots. That's right. I'm interested perhaps to talk a little bit about terpenes. So terpenes are part of the plant, but they're part of many plants as well. And I see popping up onto the market combinations of terpenes, single terpenes like beta-caryophyllene, or combinations for pain or, sleep and others that'll sort of pep you up. So I'm interested to hear people's thoughts, because again, here we're sort of taking a bit out of the cannabis plant, or it could be, in a lot of cases, they've just taken the same terpenes that are present in other plants and put them together in a bottle. And they seem to be hitting the market as well. So what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so hops, which is in the same family as cannabis, we've been getting hops oil extracts, and they're rich in many of the terpenes that are present in cannabis, as you said,
So
maybe
just explain what terpenes are.
Okay, so terpenes are the essential oils. They're the lovely things we smell in the plant kingdom, and they exert a benefit or an effect on our on our biosphere when we aromatherapy, for instance, is using terpenes. What we notice definitely with the cannabis extracts that we bring in and that we make ourselves is that if we remove the terpenes, you have a particular kind of effect that once you put the terpenes back in is so that the cannabinoid base for that we might be left with, if we put in calming terpenes that are known to be calming, then we absolutely see that effect is borne out by the entourage effect of all these things combined together. And likewise, if we put other things in, say like limonene, that are more exciting and wake us up, then the cannabinoids seem to follow that pathway as well. We use hops oil. What I've noticed is that when we take isolates or separated terpenes, such as myrcene, and if you have that about half an hour before you take a dose of THC, it is just so much stronger. The felt effects are massively amplified. So I think that just like isolating the cannabinoids from each other is contentious, is difficult, is taking one of many elements and expecting it to work better than all of these things that we've co-evolved with together. I think taking isolated terpenes and adding them in isn't as good as finding things that have a whole effect that we already know. Like, there's been a lot of study into terpenes, right? The terpenes are largely legal out there, so many medicinal plants have them in there, and we know the effects of them. So it's wonderful to get them and add them into different mixtures to create a more calming effect or to wake people up more, depending on what they need. If they're experiencing anxiety, then more anxiolytic terpenes. If they're experiencing depression, then things that are more, that are more innovating, that get us back to a state of being present, of homeostasis. So, as far as you'd be a good man to talk about terpenes. No?
Still experimenting.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think terpenes are, of course, very, very important. I'll add in terpenes orally through essential oils, and one of my favourite ones, copaiba oil, which contains beta-caryophyllene, which is a great anti-inflammatory terpene, and it actually interacts with our cannabis receptors, especially the ones associated with inflammation and immune response, and it binds to the side of those receptors and makes them stronger effectively, and we get a stronger response. And adding in myrcene, myrcene's the terpene which gives us that relaxing couch lock sort of effect that we find with strong indicas and kush strains of cannabis. So choosing your medicines are important between plants, and I think probably Luke would be most on this. I'm not really my area, but the extraction process for terpenes, I understand, is very important as well, because they they come off a little earlier in the process, and if you don't take care, you can lose a lot of the terpenes. So a good oils ain't oils, and a good oil takes those terpenes out, then purifies the oil and gets rid of the plant matter, then you put the terpenes back in, and that way you maintain more of the original structure of the plant. So extraction's really important to get that full plant effect as well. So of course, terpenes are very important, and that is the entourage effect. And I suppose the most basic entourage effect is between THC and CBD, and not terpenes. Dr. Russo, who Luke was referencing, had done a lot of work on terpenes, is world leader in terpenes, is an American doctor and scientist, and noticed that if you took 5 milligrams of THC, it caused a certain amount of anxiety in people, and that was measurable from an anxiety scale. But then if you took a small amount of CBD, you could then increase that THC dose up to, I think it was 38 or 48 milligrams, and the same level of anxiety was noted. So that's our most basic entourage, and the most important entourage, I think, is between CBD and THC. So copaiba oil is COPAIBA, and it contains the active terpenes called beta-caryophyllene, CAROPHYLLENE, I think. And I think they probably sell it at the apothecary across the road.
We have it downstairs.
And we've also got it downstairs at the Hemp Embassy.
I think I noticed terpenes in my practice mostly with flour, because I think the CO2 extraction pulls a lot out in the medical model, and a lot of the producers are not, they're not really giving us enough information about what's in there, and a lot of them aren't adding. So I think a lot of the time, we're dealing with very small amounts of terpenes and minor cannabinoids, but it's mostly CBD and THC, unless we're prescribing flour, and then it becomes very, very obvious which terpenes are having different effects. And I think it's fascinating. I think over the next few years, flour especially will evolve into what I call medical flour. There are a few that they just put people to sleep. There's no fun, there's no recreation in it. They vape it and they're going to bed. And other flowers are not quite so potent at treating insomnia. And I think it'll be really interesting to watch us get away from indica sativa into much more kind of medical strains, and then with legalization, recreational strains as well. And that will all be based on terpenes and minor cannabinoids. But in the oils, it's harder to tell, especially because the producers they're not all over it yet in the kind of legal oils, for sure.
Something I noticed when I came into the cannabis industry 3.5 years ago now, was that most of the doctors were treating with oils in bottles. Capsules really hadn't made it onto the market. And then last year, I suppose, there was much more flour onto the market very quickly. And a lot of the companies are now ramping up, which I thought was interesting, because when I started to read about, my background is as a Chinese herbalist, and when I started to read about cannabis and what was happening in the history in the US in particular, and the bud tenders, and I actually met a bud tender and I worked with him for a while, and he had the kind of knowledge that I guess traditional herbalists had, because they tried out a lot of the strains and worked out what really works and what does what. I thought that's a different level of sophistication of understanding herbal medicine, which sits pretty well with me because, as I said, my background is Chinese herbal medicine. So I'm interested to sort of talk about what I see as the next level of development of the medicinal cannabis industry in Australia, where you're starting to get the language now, indica and sativa. You probably wouldn't have heard that about 3 years ago. They would have just talked about the ratios of CBD to THC, whether you've got a balanced ratio or high CBD to THC or the other way around. Now we're starting to get that into, a lot of the companies are talking about the indicas and the sativas, the other phytocannabinoids, the other terpenes. And I'm finding this fascinating. I think it's fantastic, to be honest. And it's where, as an educator, my education is now definitely going, is to go to that next level of sophistication. So I'm interested to talk to all of you, your thoughts on this as part of the development of an industry?
I'd like to comment on that. I really like the emergence of cannabis as opening the gates to approach, to embrace more herbs. And I believe that allows the modern medicine become more art of medicine again, the more artisan way, not just prescribing, single pills and, off you go. And herbs have so many different therapeutic approaches. So I think like it's almost, when you deal with herbs, speaking metaphorically, it's almost like alchemy. You're cooking with this, you add this, you take this, and then you get this, final result of healing. But healing is not just about herbs. I think spirituality and all the aspects are very important. But herbs open so many therapeutic properties that, for example, terpenes. I don't have experience in using terpenes in isolation, but I know that they really enhance and contribute. Now, when it comes to dry herb, I'm very pleased to see the emergence of that. It started sort of happening in 2019, and we are using more in treatment oils in combination of herbs. And it's very individualized because some person may need more oil, another person may need a little bit of herb. So it's good, again, like alchemy, like cooking. You add this, you add that. And in my personal experience, I know it's probably a very naive way of thinking, probably doesn't have too much of a scientific basis, but I am vaping CBD predominant herb. And I kind of feel, okay, if I am vaping, it goes directly to my lung. It goes directly to my tumors, and it's probably working there. I'm not sure there's any scientific confirmation, but that's my belief. And I know that mind is very strong. Whatever you believe, it works for you. So I really love the emergence of different forms of medication, but also like cannabis has so much to offer. I'd like to see not just regulated and, produced by big pharma. We should see the local growers, artisan growers bringing different strains, because it just can offer so much to us. So, yeah, thank you.
John?
I think a really important thing about terpenes is that they're very quickly metabolized when you eat them orally. When you take them orally, they go to your liver, and that's called first pass metabolism, and they really get broken down quickly that way. So the way to benefit most, as you've seen, there's been a big growth of dried flower and buds being prescribed. And when you inhale and vaporize cannabis, the terpene level you get's much higher. So the actual level of terpenes in the cannabis plant is quite small. So when you inhale them, they are active in those small amounts. But if you ate that small amount, you're not going to get that same terpene effect. So you have to have quite a lot more terpene in the oral oils or oral medicines. And so, yeah, vaporization is going to become more and more popular. And I think just the quality of flower is going to be the main thing, and giving everyone the choice and understanding and education about each in particular flower. And that'll become the finesse of a good cannabis doctor will say, well, this one's going to be a little bit better for you. This one's going to not keep you awake. This one will get you to sleep. This one will help your pain. This one will help your anxiety, but that one won't necessarily. So, I think, going back to the old school, I suppose, and inhaling cannabis, but maybe not burning it, will definitely be more and more popular. Do
you want to just comment on exactly what you... I mean, I know the answer to it, but why not burning it? Why vape?
Oh, yeah, so we don't want to combust cannabis, like smoke it. Because it's irritant to the lungs, there's no studies that have been done saying, look, it causes you more lung cancer. That's not a true thing. So you're not going to get more chance of cancer from smoking cannabis, but you can get troubles breathing, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, irritation to your lungs, and in the long term that's not good for health. So vaporization is effectively low temperature burning, and we heat the plant up to about approximately 190, 200 degrees, and all the cannabinoids and all the terpenes are boiled off that plant, and we inhale them, and you get an immediate effect and a strong effect, and you just leave behind all that plant matter. And it's the plant matter, the combustion of that plant matter, which causes damage. Yeah.
But also smoking incinerates about 30 to 50% of cannabinoids, so it's very, very inefficient as well. A lot of it just goes up with the smoke.
I think it's just worth mentioning, you're talking about first pass there, where a lot of the chemical constituents that have got therapeutic benefit are taken out by the stomach acids and so forth. The other thing that oral ingestion does is you get a bunch of different chemicals like delta-9 THC in the liver turns into 11-hydroxyl, so it exerts a very different effect. And the main thing as far as smoking or vaporisation that I think is of immediate benefit is just the speed of delivery. It's so fast, 30 seconds to a minute you start to feel the effects, whereas when you eat it, depending on what your metabolic rate is, it can be anywhere from, I've had people report up to 4 hours, and if you've got serious pain, if you've got anxiety, if you've got any number of things, waiting that long, I think the average is around sort of 45 minutes to an hour, but that can still be far too long for some patients that need immediate relief, so I really support the vaporising method, likewise.
Did you want to comment on that too? No. Okay, so yes.
When you said vaping, that you heat it to quite a high temperature, does that then become psychoactive?
Yes, that will.
It does.
That will decarboxylate your cannabis.
Oh,
Yep. So when you vaporise, it will activate it, and it will become psychoactive if there's THC in there.
Okay, what's the temperature that it doesn't?
Oh,
More or less.
quite low.
It's 80s.
Yeah, it's 80. It's a time-based thing, and so it's 80 degrees for like 20 minutes. But as your temperature increases, the more energy goes into the system, so it can happen immediately. So if you're using a lighter, the lighter burns at about 400 or 500 degrees or something like that. So you're immediately giving all that energy, and you can convert a lot quickly, so you'll get a stronger effect. But as Teresa mentioned, a lot of it will go up in smoke, and you'll break down a lot of the active ingredients.
Right.
So if you're wanting CBDA or THCA medicines, then it would stand to reason that you'd probably need to use them largely orally.
That's right.
So another, I guess, observation is around the dollars that go into the cannabis industry, from my perspective anyway. So you've got some of the big pharmaceutical companies in the US and other places have put their money into what they hope is the magic bullet, the drug, like dronabinol and nabilone, which is synthetic THC. You've got another company that put CBD and THC in relatively equal ratios into a bottle called Nabiximols. And then you've got, as I said, then you've got your plant-based medicines. So I'm interested, and I don't have the answers on this, but I'm interested in, I guess, the forces at play here. Now, generally, and I've seen this in Chinese medicine, where there was what I'd call a medical takeover attempt of acupuncture, where, sort of 20 years ago, there were lots of doctors saying only doctors trained in acupuncture, medical acupuncture, using single-use disposable needles, well, we were all using those too, should be allowed to practice acupuncture. So it was an attempt. There was a sociologist called Evan Willis at La Trobe University that wrote a book called Medical Dominance, and he actually talked about this as one of his case studies. So I'm sort of interested in watching how things are playing out worldwide in the cannabis industry, because this, to me, almost smacks of attempts of medical takeovers. And I don't mean any disrespect to my medical colleagues here, but we've got a system in Australia, for example, where only doctors are allowed to prescribe it, not herbalists. We do have a good quality control system which operates for medicines and complementary medicines. I actually think that's a good thing. But on a world scale, you've got a lot of the big companies sort of hovering around. They've got the money to put into medical research. Less money is available to smaller companies to actually put money into research. And therefore, sometimes they're not able to, get their products out there because governments will say we don't have the evidence. So I'm interested in, I guess, comments, and that can be from the audience as well.
Question over here.
Yeah, I'm here, over here.
Yeah, okay.
I'm so glad that you've raised that. That is one of my biggest issues. And the thing that really concerns me is dosages. As you know, everybody's dose is individual, and sometimes it's just by one drop. And how do you prescribe that as a doctor? People need to titrate their own doses to find out what works for them. So it's very, very expensive. And the irony is that people that are ill usually can't work and they can't afford the prices that are being asked of them. Hence the black market. But how do you get around that morally and ethically as doctors?
Yeah, so the physical part's easy. How do we dose people? We use a little syringe, and you can tell if there's 0.1 of a mil in there, that may be 2 milligrams. It depends on the concentration, but you can correlate exactly the dose to the volume of liquid you're giving. It's a little harder to dose vaporisation, but kind of patients will self-regulate that. In terms of money, which is kind of what we're talking about, there's actually been a lot of progress, I think, in the cost of things. In the legal market now, whole plant CBDs can be accessed for about 6.6 cents per milligram, which is very, very cheap. It's, even in the green market, approaching that sort of pricing is probably about the same or maybe even better than, yeah. So the legal market's actually cheaper now for CBD. It's not the same for THC and it's not the same for flower, but they're rapidly approaching each other.
Do you see that across the board though? Because my understanding is there's 170 odd products out there, and there just seems to be so much disparity in the cost, just like there is in the green market.
It's not across the board, no, it's definitely not.
It's wonderful news that there are, whole plant extracts now becoming legally available that are on parity or even more affordable in some instances. It's just wonderful news. That's what we want to say.
It's great, yeah, and it's and it does make it affordable. The expensive name comes from certain diseases, I think, and ailments we're treating. So epilepsy is the main one where the big cost comes in, because for the grower and the producer, the cost is the same if you're producing a THC molecule or a CBD molecule. It doesn't matter as a horticulturalist. I believe it's about right? So when you're using these medicines, you use a lot less milligrams of THC to get the effect you want. Whereas with CBD, you might use 100, 200, 300 milligrams a day, and that's where the cost comes in. So you're paying per milligram. So even if it's still cheap, it ends up costing a lot.
And we've had our first PBS listing, I think it was a couple of days ago. Was that for Epidiolex? And there was about 150 patients, so not many, but there's the first PBS listing. So government supported.
That's a good move.
Medicine. And was it for Epidiolex? Because I'm pretty sure it was for. Okay, yeah, which is good news for those 150 people because they can spend tens of thousands of dollars a year. So hopefully we see more of that as well. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very complex subject, this, isn't it? I mean, my personal view on a lot of these companies is that if they're paying shareholders instead of putting that back into patient care, then I would try and avoid them personally with my prescribing. And I think, once we get further down the road of legalisation and like Teresa said, there'll be more kind of sort of craft producers. I think that's going to change this landscape as well. And then it just becomes about education and choice, doesn't it? So people knowing where they're going to go or who they're going to talk to. I mean, my personal opinion is this plant, it's a master plant or a teacher plant, and there are a number of them that can all grow in our gardens, especially on somewhere like the North Coast. And we should have the ability to do that if we choose to and make our own medicines. But I'm a shit gardener, and I'm not very good at extracting things from plants, so I would like to be able to go somewhere else. I had a really interesting patient who came to see me a few months ago, and he sat down and he said, I grow my own plants. And I said, wonderful, that's great. And then he said, and I make my own oils. And I said, that's great, so why are you here talking to me? And he said, I don't want to drink home-brewed beer every day, do I? Which was spot on. And I think some of us want to live in a world where we can grow our own plants and we can go somewhere else to get something of a higher quality or more guaranteed or whatever it looks like. And then I think all of us and everyone in this room would agree that we have to start being more discerning about where we buy our medicines from. And there's this space, there's other spaces opening up where there's companies that are valued at $1 billion having never sold a single medicine. And none of it makes any sense to me. And I think there's a lot of let's call it shit, rising to the surface. And it's a result of a patriarchal system that's been in place for many hundreds of years. And it's starting to fall apart. But a lot of us need to keep in this fight for that to happen and continue happening.
Yeah.
Just one thing. I also want to add to something that, look, medicine and money have always been interconnected. But I'd like to say, after practicing about 30 years as a conventional GP, I don't believe we are doing the best job treating chronic diseases. In spite of the emergence of so many different drugs, antidepressants and so on, the society is becoming more depressed, sicker, and more anxious. And I believe that we are ending up with such a huge polypharmacy. So if someone is taking 10 to 20 different drugs, I guess it's not very cheap. And I believe if we move more into cannabis and other herbal medicine, we are able to treat patients in a community in a better way, more holistically. This way we can reduce the number of hospital admissions, we can reduce the number of unnecessary surgeries. So that's why I would like to see politicians. I mean, when you talk to politicians, you have to talk money, but I think it's a very convincing argument that we can actually reduce the cost to the healthcare economy, and that's why I'd also like to see cannabis becoming on PBS. I think maybe even in about 5 years it will become possible. But once again, we really need to be mindful that our approach to chronic disease management is not the best. People are becoming sicker in spite of using so much of a polypharmacy. And as a world in general, we're becoming so anxious and depressed. So what are we doing wrong?
Thinking about money and finance again, it's really interesting how it works. It's the same system for all pharmacy across Australia. It doesn't matter if it's aspirin or a heart medication or cannabis. To get something on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, first of all, you have to list it on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, which you can do when you pay the TGA a large amount of money. And then, even if you've done that, the onus is upon the suppliers to do that, to provide their own evidence, studies for these medications that they're efficacious, they work. Then, for a medicine to get onto the PBS, it's compared by the government to other medications which have a similar use. And then money comes into it. So, CBD, it's a better anti-inflammatory than aspirin, say. But aspirin's a couple of 100 times cheaper. So aspirin will be on the PBS, but cannabis won't. So that's the sort of decision that the government makes. So it is weeding out a lot of the possibility of someone who grows locally in this area to get a medication listed on the PBS is impossible. Yeah. And it is controlled by money. You need a lot of money to do that, and you need a lot of backing to do that. So it's a long road, but I do hope it gets on the PBS. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, though. But
look, when you think about it, let's say aspirin is cheaper, but then we need to treat so many patients with gastrointestinal bleeding. How much of a gastrointestinal bleeding you will get from CBD? And CBD, in fact, is good for our gut. So we also need to, it's maybe cheaper to make it in first step, but then the adverse effects and the cost of treating these adverse effects.
We've got a fundamental problem in regulation, though, because at the moment, cannabis is still an unapproved good, an unapproved medicine in the eyes of the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So because of that, and it's also a scheduled drug, Schedule 4 for CBD, as long as you've got at least 98% of the cannabinoids of CBD, then it's Schedule 4, Schedule 8 for all the other
cannabis medicines.
It's
just been descheduled to level 3.
No, it hasn't.
Not available yet because it was the schedule, but for the product to become over the counter, it has to be registered on ARTG.
Exactly.
And at this stage,
Correct.
they are not products as such,
Correct.
so we need to wait.
Yeah, so that was the recent news. It was, and it's capped at a particular daily dosage of, I think, of 150 milligram. CBD. So that sounded great, and all these patients were ringing up doctors and saying, great, can we go into the chemist now and buy a CBD? Well, the answer is no, because to get a product onto that Schedule 3, which is a pharmacy-only medicine, which means you've got to go and get permission from the pharmacist to get that CBD oil, they've got to have the required, probably RCT, randomised controlled trial data on efficacy. So they have to show safety and quality and efficacy to get onto that. So of course none of the companies hold that data at the moment. So yes, it is possible, but no one's got the data to actually get anything on there. So the shelves remain empty. So, it comes back to this sort of thing as, well, why are we still calling it an unapproved good? We are now almost 6 years down the track. 2016 was when medical access was at least legalised in a group of practitioners. And yet we've got countries overseas where you can just go into a health food shop and buy your CBD. And I'm not saying that they're bad in terms of their quality. Some are very good quality. But we can't do that here. Now, when we get to that point, then I think we'll start to see, and I've got no problems with the TGA in terms of regulating quality, by the way, because I actually think that's one of the strengths of our country, is that we do regulate quality of complementary medicines very well. My argument is that I think that really cannabidiol should be treated like any other herbal medicine and regulated as such. Now, I think I saw some hands waving, so let's see if we can get some microphones down to them.
Be heard now? Okay.
Yep.
Listen, just 2 quick comments and a question. Dr. Teh, you mentioned the issue of the Association of Cannabis Smoking and Lung Cancer. That was extensively investigated by epidemiological work during the Nixon era, and there was found not only did it not induce an excess of lung cancers, but there was actually 30% lung cancer incidence in cannabis smokers. Nixon was furious, I understand, and destroyed all the reports, but it's still in existence. Kylie, you raised the issue of whether there may be a takeover of medicine. Are you serious? We're here at a political protest because the allopathic medical system has banned the safest therapeutic substance in the universe for 80 years and now wants to control and manipulate it. Right? I find it offensive that sort of would come up as a question. But considering this is a panel looking at things, I'd like to ask Luke, because I think you're probably the only person that would know, to give some comments about the therapeutic differences between the acids and the decarboxylated varieties. What I've found is that, for instance, to dose a child, you can weigh out a gram quantity of quality bud and put it in their hemp seed smoothie. That's a very convenient way of producing acids with all the terpenes. None of the extraction chemicals and none of the expense. So can you just comment on your experiences with the therapeutic differences between the acids and the non-acids?
I can. I mean, you're doing a pretty good job of commenting on that yourself. And you're welcome to continue, as far as I'm concerned. But look, I think that there's a really good case for the use of CBDA, THCA. There's some, patients need a rather large amount of cannabinoids, and when they're decarboxylated, they can become difficult to dose highly for, geriatric, paediatric, or sensitive to these cannabinoid cases. And we often see intractable cases of epilepsy, say in children, of many different kinds that don't seem to react very well, or only partially. We see a partial benefit to using decarboxylated CBD, THC, whole plant combinations or varieties. And as soon as we change to a THCA, CBDA combination, even at lower doses, we can get a serious, very visible patient benefit very quickly. We often do find you need to titrate that reasonably quickly as well. But as you said, you can actually get the whole plant as it is and just grind it up, depending on how it's been dried, of course, and how long it's been stored, because heat and time decarboxylates. So you can just use the whole plant as it is. There's various methods that extract CBDA and THCA quite effectively. And I think there's just a lot more to be put into this to really understand why it happens. I don't know why it happens like that. All I know is that it does happen, and it does happen frequently. That being said, it's fairly condition and even patient specific. These benefits, CBDA, THCA doesn't do very well for people with anxiety, but certainly does well for people that have depression. It's more energising, it's uplifting. The decarboxylate molecules tend to be more calming. That being said, the right amount is always the determining factor, and it's a bit of a process for each patient to find out what's their very best dose, and they're the best gauges of their experience, unless they're incapacitated or too young to actually share that experience well, and in which case their carers can give us that kind of feedback. And doctors, the people caring for them, have a really wonderful role to play. I hope that herbalists, I hope that natural doctors are able to take a more formal approach. I don't necessarily hold out hope for that in the near future, given the way the Australian system works, but practically on the ground, that's what's going on, and the more we all get together and share information, the better, and I'm really happy to be here with these people and yourself too, and all you people.
Next question. Yep.
Yeah. I'd like to, over here, I'd like to address this one, to the whole panel really, but to Luke specifically because of a previous comment that you made, Luke. When you were speaking about using isolates. My question is, what is stopping you from taking, instead of using isolates, taking 2 whole plant extracts and mixing them for the effect that you need? So you were saying that you had a decoction that didn't have enough CBD in it, so you added an isolate of CBD. Why not just blend 2 whole plant extracts together, CBD rich, THC rich? Does that work? Or
certainly it does. We have combinations of up to 7 different strains across the 60 odd products that we're working with. It's simply a matter of interest that you can get a whole plant extract, which is relatively, I'm looking for patient benefit, and that includes affordability. Otherwise there is no benefit if you can't afford it, right? So you can get an isolate. It's so cheap. A kilo of an isolate is literally a couple of $1,000 for 98.9, and over percent CBD. So it was in that in the vein of affordability that I would get whole plant extracts, which we have tested here by a wonderful approved lab here. And then into that we get these isolates simply to try and get a much more affordable product. And also it's just a lot easier to make those combinations for me to standardise. I'm interested in trying to standardise things as much as possible for people. We do our terpene reports, our pesticides, our heavy metals, and our cannabinoid reports. It's harder to make blends of. It's difficult to make blends without getting an array of different effects. But certainly it is effective, and we do it. We do it out of interest. But what I was doing with the isolates is just trying to get the price down. Another product that we work with that we've made as cheap as an isolate for patients to access is. It's a whole plant extract that then has the THC fractionally distilled out of it. Do I think that's a great thing? Look, whatever works best for the patient, but I know that's good for the person who's terribly anxious about driving. I know that's good for the person who's a transport or mining worker who needs something but can't afford to risk their job because they're supporting their children, they're supporting their partners. These things, we must really take care with what the patient needs are. First and foremost, and so we've had this whole plant medicine that's got is it whole plant anymore if you take the THC out of it? It was a whole plant. You take the THC out of it, you've got the entourage of all these other cannabinoids, put the terpenes back in, and you can get a much better, more stable, and I think personally a lot more safer outcome than using isolates. I've dosed myself extremely on a lot of various different things above what I would call a recommended standard to see what the outcomes are. And I had my first allergic reaction I've ever had in my life was off a lot of isolate all at once. Was that a combination of what else I'd eaten that day or a bunch of other cofactors? I don't know. All I know is I took that same amount, thousands of milligrams, in a whole plant extract, and I slept very, very well, thank you, for a long time. But I didn't get that. I didn't get hives. I didn't break out. So does that answer your question effectively enough? That I'm just looking for the best benefit for the patient, and I think it's worth taking these voyages of discovery, even if we think we know what the outcomes and determinations of those experiments are. It's still worth finding out if we do it in a safe and controlled manner, or take our own responsibility for not doing that personally. So, yeah.
Okay, next question.
This is just a comment. I'm a GP in the local area and have been doing integrated medicine for 20 plus years. In the big picture of medicalisation of any structure, there's no point talking to governments about the long-term health effects and how we're saving money, because really the sickness industry drives the financial system. You know, it serves them that we're emotionally not able to meet our own needs, that, you know, we have to keep shopping or taking drugs or whatever it is to fill up the big black hole. We don't actually know how to meet that stuff. You know, they know emotional intelligence is the number one predictor of health and success for our future. But, you know, they don't want to implement that in schools. They don't want to implement that in medical, you know, establishments, because it drives the corporate business of government. So, you know, really, the best thing about that is that individuals are needing to actually make these choices and do the research and come and listen to you guys, and really appreciate your information. Thank you very much.
I think that's a really good point. And these medicines do go completely against the grain for exactly those reasons, you know. If you think about anandamide as a state, it's a state of presence and being, as opposed to dissociation, which is an opiate state. So we've got endorphins that are released naturally when we're about to be eaten by a dinosaur, and we have anandamide, which is present when we are, you know, we're in a regulated homeostatic place, and the current system is designed to push people into the sickness, into endorphins, into dissociation, into not dealing with our emotions, into buying McDonald's and booze and all the other shit. And all of these medicines are pushing humans into a direction that our society, the establishment, the patriarchy, I don't know what the word is for it, but it's going against the grain, and I think that's one of the most challenging aspects of pushing this forward. Because there's a lot of, let's say, doctors who just don't get that, you know, they don't work in that way. So, you know, it's like bottom up, top down, the whole thing needs to be ripped apart and put back together, and that's going to take a long time.
Hear, hear. Okay. So, look, I think we've run out of time, so... We haven't? Okay. I thought we had to finish at 1.
No, you're welcome to go to, say, about 1:15.
Oh, great. Okay, next question then. Beautiful.
We've got people here.
Yes. My next question is in regards to isolated CBD and whole plant CBD. We're looking for interactions with whole plant CBD. Do we use the same measure of approximately 100 milligrams of CBD? Does isolated CBD interact at the same levels, or is it different?
Yeah, good question. I can't say I've seen any direct studies on it, but we do know that CBD will inhibit an enzyme in our livers called cytochrome P450. And that enzyme is an enzyme which breaks down CBD itself, breaks down THC, but breaks down a lot of other medications. In my practice, I have a line drawn in the sand of about 100 milligrams a day of CBD. And if someone's over that amount, I'll monitor them for drug interactions, so meaning the drugs that they may be taking may be a bit stronger because they're not getting broken down effectively by that enzyme. So as far as I know, CBD alone will have that effect. And if we're using more CBD to get a clinical effect, well then we're more chance of getting that side effect. So if we can get a clinical effect at below 100 milligrams of CBD with a full plant product, we're not going to get that liver effect. But to get that same clinical effect, we might need 150 milligrams or more, say, of an isolate. And just from our personal experience on the panel, all the doctors here will similarly agree. So then we're pushing ourselves into that side effect range or that drug interaction range. So that's the reason that the government put a 150 milligram cap on over-the-counter CBD, which is a sensible thing, and it probably should be a little bit lower in all honesty, but that's better. At least it exists. So I think it's a relevant thing to pay attention to, and could well be that we'll have more side effects with the isolates because we're using more.
Okay, another question.
Just one last thing. We see a lot of people coming through Nimbin with, who are using cannabis to great benefit, and it's just so good to see that. And a lot of people provide a great service. We've been listening to a word called de-pharmaceuticalisation bandied around lately, And what it makes me think is that just as normal people, like the herbalists, I consider herbalists really normal people. Doctors, you guys are, another kind of realm in a way. I really appreciate the science that doctors bring to it, just like that information you gave us then, because then the more lay people can understand what you're saying and they can pass that information on. I super appreciate that. But my thing is that do we really need to go all the way to pharmaceuticalisation to come all the way back to where we already are now? And that's kind of what's happening in Canada. It went all the way to pharmaceuticalisation, and then they went, oh, hang on, we don't really know what we're doing. And it's come back, and now the model that Canada is looking at looks like the hemp embassy. So it's very interesting. Do we have to go all that way? Do we have to take another 10, 20 years and everyone's a criminal, people are dying without medicine, the whole thing, just to get back to here?
History always repeats itself, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we need new governments, to be honest.
We definitely
the system is broken. Okay.
Hi, my concern is regarding mental health. I've got an adult daughter with 25 years experience in schizophrenia, and which is resistant to treatment. And I know a lot of people that go through the psych units in the Northern Rivers region that are not being helped. And my concern is I don't trust the establishment wanting to regulate medications. I know that my daughter's on medication that costs thousands of dollars a week, let alone a month. And it's not working. She has active psychosis a lot of the time. But I'm not allowed to experiment with a CBD plant down my backyard, yet the DMS manual, the DSM manual, has not got any evidence in relation to these antipsychotic drugs, but they're known to cause scarring on the brain after 20 years. Really? I really want an approach that can be responsibly experimented with. I want my daughter to be healthy as she can be. How do I find people, psychiatrists, that are on board with this? Given how much PBS money there is in Australia to support Big Pharma making trillions of dollars every year experimenting on our kids, experimenting on us.
It's a big question. I don't really think there's a satisfactory answer for you. The DSM, the DSM changes every time it's re-released because they change their minds. And it doesn't have complex PTSD as a recognised condition. So I think that's as far as I'll go with talking about the DSM publicly. Psychiatrists are trained in a certain way, and holistic management of people, mind-body integration, spirituality, free choice are not really ideas they deal in, I suppose. I think for this plant, it needs to be legalised, and then things will change rapidly. And, the people in this room, the people in this area of the world, we're a bit different, and we're very lucky. But there's parts of Australia where people will still go to their doctor, and they don't think the way we do in this room. So then this plant needs to be medicalised in some way so it can help some people. But what you're talking about is, something else. So free choice, yes. Thanks, John. It's a hornet's nest, isn't it? And I think everything you've said resonates with everyone in this room. And I think a lot of us would slowly like to see it change drastically. Inch by inch, I guess.
I think a lot of the pharmaceutical medications, they are very expensive, and we don't realise how expensive they are because we don't pay for them. We only pay a fraction, and the government takes up the rest of the bill. So, of course, there's a lot of pharmaceutical lobby on the government, and they make a lot of money out of that. a lot of the pharmaceutical medications that are created are literally created and trialled either by accident or trial and error. Oh, that seems to help this ailment. And especially with antipsychotics, we're not really certain about those mechanisms. It's not 100% certain. Same with anti-epileptic medications, they're not 100% certain. So they're put out there, they're tried and tested, and those big pharma companies do have the money to get those studies done. And they prove that there is an increase in efficacy for maybe only 30% of people, but that's 30% of people that are getting better. And so that's enough to get it through, or even less is enough to get it through. So you're right, a lot of these medications are harmful, and pharmaceutical companies in all the jurisdictions where cannabis has been either medically or recreationally legalised, the use of opiate medications drops drastically. The purchasing of alcohol drops drastically, and even violent crime drops drastically. So, we are preaching to the converted in this room, but there's also people here that this may be new to. So do exercise your free choice. Whenever a doctor tells you to do something, that's just their opinion. They're just suggesting something for you to do. You don't have to do it. It's your choice in the end. And that goes from everything from an indigestion medication all the way to chemotherapy. It's still your choice. And make sure you hold on to that choice and think about it from your point of view and your body's point of view.
Just picking up on that comment though, the TGA put out advertising guidelines for medicinal cannabis businesses, and I've had a couple of arguments with them already because my background and what I do is educate. So if I talk about, particularly if I started to talk about any specific cultivars, let's say, that might be products, then I am promoting an unapproved good and I could get a very big fine, etc., etc. So we've got a problem in terms of education. I believe in human rights to information and knowledge. And I'm not necessarily saying about brands of things, but if we're going to just talk about even the strains of cannabis, so the cultivars, and saying what strain might be better for this condition or that condition, people are already jumping on Dr. Google for everything else. And yet, in this country, there's almost a gag on public education, and that bothers me a lot.
Argot inane, Parramatta grass ergot insane. I'm seeing it growing all over the the question really is, Doctor, bacteria is big in this house. Cannabis in the bud has a highly antiseptic aroma. Will vaping not admit death on the throat, lung bacteria too? And is not eating or skin bathing the wise way? Thank you.
So what was the question? Would vaping help stop bacterial infections in the lung?
Perhaps the antiseptic nature of the oil in the fresh leaf bud might be antibacterial, and on the thousands of bacteria of which we are host. So my question is vaping that safe, really, by comparison with,
I think vaping's very safe. Yeah, I think it's very safe. I'm not sure where to go with that one, so I might leave that one.
I just want to comment. You say free choice, exercise your free choice, but we don't have free choice. So long as we have to have a prescription to take medicinal cannabis. We do not have to have a prescription to buy tobacco, or I can kill myself with a packet of Panadol. We don't have to have a prescription to get a brandy in the pub. I don't believe we need a prescription to use medicinal cannabis for our health benefits. I believe prohibition should be lifted. I really love what you're doing in terms of strains and what they're good for and what they're not good for. I think the more research, the better. But I do really believe this is a herb that everybody can grow if they want to. I don't grow potatoes, I buy potatoes. Everybody can grow their own medicine if they want. And I really believe there's way too much emphasis on legalisation now and not enough emphasis on lifting prohibition.
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think we should have that free choice, but unfortunately that's a political question at the moment. So I agree with you. I think that we should have that choice. And as you say, you're not very good at growing potatoes, so you grow your own. The choice I was talking about is the choice not to take a substance into your body. More that choice. So if you're prescribed something which you don't want to take, you don't have to take it. That was more the choice. I agree that we should all have the free choice to take a safe substance.
Okay, we have a question here. Okay.
Fresh leaf. If you just pick it out of the garden, do you get any benefit from it?
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah, you definitely do.
What are the benefits of raw cannabis?
That's how you use it.
Yeah, so you get a lot of anti-inflammatory effects. So eating or juicing fresh leaf has been helpful for a lot of people with inflammatory bowel disease. That's a good one. THCA has been anecdotally associated with helping children with epilepsy in this town and autism spectrum disorder as well. So I haven't got any studies I can produce to verify that, but that's happened as an anecdotal event in this town for many years.
Surely that is the point. We don't have. Don't worry.
I just want to say one thing, sorry. My parents' generation, they, in spite of experiencing war and all of these disasters, a lot of them lived into long age. For example, my mom lived almost 89, but she told me that when she was growing up as a child, hemp was just everywhere, and she used to eat seeds, and then cows and other animals were fed by hemp and so on. So I also feel that this generation, in spite of experiencing so much hardship, especially women, still manage to live to a long life. And in spite of depression, hardship, war, malnutrition, and so on. So it was more available, and I think maybe that generation happened to have better endocannabinoid system because of that exposure. She said, I used to eat seeds all the time, every day.
Okay, we've got another question.
Hi there. My name's David Hill. I'm a veteran Afghan as well as a current police, not serving. I've been using the oils from here actually for the last 2 years. My question to you is quite a short one. Is there a directory or a website or something where I can find doctors like yourselves and people like-minded that I don't have to go doctor shopping throughout Victoria? I'm from Victoria. I don't have to go doctor shopping to find someone who's willing to help me. Is there some sort of,
list or... yes, there is actually. The Hemp Embassy's got one.
throughout for Australia-wide?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got, and there's also Pondering Pot as a list, and there's also a thing called the Green List. So we've got links on our website to those as well. So I'll come and we've got a huge list of all the different doctors and clinics that are helping people get access.
Thank you for your time.
I don't think there's an official list from the government or anything like that.
No. Yeah.
There isn't.
Okay, we have another question here, and then one more, and then that's all.
Okay, go.
Just a quick question and a comment. As people who work in medicine, what are your opinions on the driving laws? Like, I take it personally for chronic pain, and I could have some in the morning, and then the next day I could get drug tested and fail that and lose my license, which living in a regional area, it can't happen because we don't have, it's not like the city, we don't have buses and trains to get where we need. So what are your opinions on that?
So currently in Australia, you can have 6 dexamphetamine, 4 endone, 3 Valium and 2 beers and get in the car and drive. But you can't have 2 milligrams of THC in the morning.
And that holds true whether you are a patient procuring it from the green market like myself or from PlantMed or Ananda clinics. It's such a terrible thing that you can go through everything to go and procure it legally. You can do all of that, but you still can't get up tomorrow and drive. So that's got to change immediately. It's just one of the major black spots in this whole.
There was a whole panel on this subject last night, and really the general consensus, I think, from everyone on this panel, and I probably speak for them if they don't mind, is that, yeah, that those rules aren't fair. They're not fair. You know, you can have a beer and the next day you can drive. You can have some cannabis and the next day you can't drive technically because you may lose your license and lose your livelihood. So it's terribly unfair. And it's because those laws, they were made like 80 years apart, one in the 1940s and one in the 2020s. So they're not congruent in any way. And it's a political question. And rallies such as this are putting pressure on the government to show the falseness of their ways and trying to put the science in front of people to be aware of. So, yeah.
Canada's, when they legalised recreational use a couple of years ago, their laws are now that it's only if you're impaired and you have cannabis in your system that you could risk a fine. And that seems to be a sensible way to go about it. So we've got a model in another Western country that we could actually be adopting. And I think that's sort of worth shoving in the face of a few people too.
I'd just like to introduce Morgan in relation to Leaf. Now, Morgan, a lot of people might know, has had a very extreme journey with Crohn's, and she's been treating herself with cannabis. Would you like to speak for a sec, Morgan?
Hi, my name's Morgan Taylor. I've had Crohn's disease since I was 12 years old, and I've had a long experience with different kinds of medications and things that didn't work. So my parents were getting to a point where they were just fed up with watching their daughter be sick and in pain every day. I also have a sister that has Crohn's disease as well. And my mum just started researching, and she started looking into cannabis, but she found a doctor in America called Dr. William Courtney, who has a lot of experience with raw cannabis medicine, specifically juicing. And so we started growing some plants and I started juicing, and it was kind of like a miraculous overnight recovery. My symptoms like drastically diminished within a month, and I was doing really well until our house was raided and the cops took away all the plants. But I really recommend looking into raw cannabis medicine. I think it's really not talked about enough, and I think if everybody had cannabis in their backyard and could take it every day, I think we'd all be a lot healthier. But yeah, it's THCA is the raw form of THC, and that's what was really helping me with my Crohn's disease. And I think, THCA is something that needs to be talked about more, but it's not accessible for everyone, obviously, because you need a high number of plants in order to be juicing every day, enough that you need. I really recommend looking into Dr. William Courtney. He has a website called Cannabis International, where he has lots of videos about his experience with raw cannabis medicine.
Thanks very much, Morgan. Thank you very much to the panel. I think we'll wind it up here.